Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Janmadhyasya yato anvayaditaratascha artheshu abhigyaswarat Tene Brahma Hrudaya Adikavaye Muhyanti Yat Surayah Tejo Vari Mridam Yatha Vinimayo Yatra Trisargo Mrisha Dhamna Swena Sada Nirastakuhakam Satyam Param Dhimahi Nigamakalpataror Galitam Phalam Shukamukad Amritadrava Sanyutam Pibata Bhagavatam Rasamalayam Muhuraho Rasika Bhuvi Bhavukaha. We now enter the second chapter of the ninth Skandha of Srimad Bhagavatam. We are now hearing the lineage of Manu, the present Manu called Vaivasvata Manu, as we saw. So, Shuka Brahman continues. He says, the son Sudyumna left for forest. So, we already saw the story of Sudyumna, who was born a woman, then became a man, and then again became a woman. So, he had a lot of gender confusion. And finally, he left for the forest. So, meanwhile, Vaivasvata Manu, he wanted a proper son. So, he again practiced asceticism, it is said, on the banks of Yamuna. And he worshipped the Supreme Lord Sri Hari, and he got 10 sons. So, we already, in fact, saw the names of the 10 sons, starting with Ikshwaku, who is the first son. And the remaining sons are Nrga, Sharyati, Dishta, Dhrsta, Karusha, Narishyanta, Prsadhra, Nabhaga, and Kavi. So now Shuka Brahman will give the story of all the other 9 sons before coming to Ikshwaku, because Ikshwaku is the main son, who is the forefather of Ram, as we already saw. In his lineage come great kings such as Sagara, Bhagirath, and eventually Lord Sri Ram. And also Ikshwaku got the direct instruction of the supreme teaching from Manu, which was later given by Krishna to Arjuna. So Ikshwaku is a very prominent figure, but before coming to Ikshwaku, Shuka Brahman covers all the other sons of Manu, starting with Prsadhra. Prsadhra was a very interesting son in that he was given the responsibility of taking care of cows. So one son of Manu was simply dedicated to taking care of cows in a huge cow pen, and that was the job given to him by their guru Vasishta. So this goes to show the importance of protecting cows in those days and how it was given such high prominence that one son of the king was dedicated for this job, and he was doing this very vigilantly. But it is said that on one occasion in the night, a tiger entered the cow pen, and because of that, one cow, which was about to be caught in the tiger's jaw, screamed, and in the ensuing confusion, he came and used his sword, and unfortunately, he ended up killing the cow with his sword by mistake because of the dark night and because of the confusion, and the tiger ran away. But because of this, it was told to him that he shall now lose the privilege of being a Kshatriya. So his guru Vasishta, it is said, cursed him that because of having killed a cow, you shall now lose the privilege of being a Kshatriya. So this goes to show again the importance given to protecting cows, that the king's son was banished by the Guru Vasishta. But on the other hand, it can also be said that the Guru Vasishta was harsh here, and many commenters have said that this was harsh. He should have been given some atonement, for he did not do it intentionally. But in any case, Vasishta was harsh for whatever the reason was, and he was banished. But again, we see the beauty of all these great beings. Prsadhra, far from being demoralized, depressed, he took it as a great opportunity, accepted the curse with joined palms, and decided to exclusively focus on the Supreme Lord Vasudeva. It is said, Evam Shaptastu Guruna Pratyagrihnat Kritanjalihi Adharayat Vratam Veera Urdhvareta Munipriyam. So, having been cursed by the Guru, he folded his palms, and instead of complaining about it, instead of calling it unfair, though it seems unfair, he did not ask for any lenience, he did not ask to be pardoned, he did not ask for any atonement. He simply accepted the curse and he took it as a great opportunity to surrender completely, because now he was relieved of all duties, including taking care of cows. So he decided to be celibate for the rest of his life. Urdhvareta means one who is celibate. And then he decided to completely surrender to the Supreme Lord Vasudeva. It is said, Vasudeve Bhagavati Sarvatmani Pare Amale Ekantitvam Gato Bhaktya Sarvabhuta Suhrit Samaha. So he dedicated himself to the soul of the universe, the Supreme Being Vasudeva, in solitude, and also having well-wishing attitude towards all beings, that is having the feeling of sameness, treating everyone as same, and being a well-wisher to all beings, and exclusively devoted to the Supreme Lord Vasudeva. He spent the rest of his life, and thereby he entirely gave up all attachment, completely regulated his senses, did not have any possession, did not care about his name or worth, did not even bother about maintaining his body, ate what was available, and completely dedicated to self realization, and became tranquil of mind, peaceful, completely situated in pure wisdom, fully composed, and attained the highest purpose. So we see how beautifully here also we see a very great challenge, obstacle, curse even, has been changed into a blessing, just as Parikshit shows the way through entire Bhagavatam by taking his curse of having to die in 7 days into a great blessing by listening to Bhagavatam. And we saw how Bali did the same in the last Skandha. There are so many examples. Here again, Prsadhra, taking this curse as a great opportunity, completely dedicates to self realization, being freed of all responsibilities, and therefore completely surrendered and abiding in pure wisdom. It says here, Vimukta Sangaha Shantatma Samyata Aksho Parigraha. So, Vimukta Sangaha means free of all attachments, Shantatma tranquil completely, Samyata Aksho Aparigraha without any sense of possession or attachment, Yadrichaya Upapannena Kalpayan Vrittim Atmanaha. He ate whatever was available by providence without bothering too much to acquire food or acquire other necessities. Atmani Atmanam Adhaya Jnana Triptaha Samahitaha. Situating his mind completely in pure self and completely satisfied with this wisdom, Vichachara Mahim Etam Jada Anda Bhadir Akritihi. So thereby he roamed around in total freedom like an Avadhuta without any care for what the world thinks of him. And in this way, conducting himself in the forest, he entered the fire of wisdom, as it were, it is said, remaining completely silent, and attained oneness with the Supreme Absolute Being. It says, Tena Upayukta Karano Brahma Prapa Param Munihi. He became a great Muni. So we will see, by the way, how different sons of Manu, who are all born as Kshatriyas, go through different ways of living, showing that the birth as Kshatriya is not determinate. So now we will see this again. Kavi, who is another son of Manu, he was free of craving of sense pleasures right from the beginning. He did not care for any comforts, and therefore, even while he was young, he quit his royal position as a prince, and he simply retired to a forest and attained the supreme realization. It says, Kavihi Kaniyan Vishayeshu Nispruho. So he was not attached to sensual pleasures even when he was young. Visrajya Rajyam Sahabandhu Bandhubirvanam. And he left this kingdom, he renounced his kingdom and went to the forest. Niveshya Chitte Purusham Swarochisham Vivesha Keshoravayah Paramgataha. So thereby he completely abiding his mind in the supreme self-effulgent being, Purusham Swarochisham, he retired to the forest and entered the supreme abode, the eternal abode of the supreme being. So that was the story of the other son Kavi. So we have seen two sons now, Prsadhra and Kavi. Third is Karusha. Karusha, his sons were called Karushas, who were Kshatriyas, and they were very righteous beings. They ruled the northern parts of Bharat, it is said, and they were very devoted to protecting the sages, the Brahmanas. So this is the third son. Fourth is Dhrsta. From Dhrsta came up a clan called Dhrstas, but these Dhrstas, very surprisingly, they attained Brahmanhood. So even though they were born as Kshatriyas, they became Brahmanhood, or they attained Brahmanhood. That is, they became purely interested in being sages. So Kshatriyas are those who are interested in administration and warfare and so on. Brahmanas are those who are interested in wisdom and meditation and teaching and so on. So we see how even though the sons of Dhrsta are Kshatriyas by birth, they took to being Brahmins because that was their natural position, their constitutional position. Then the next son is Nrga, and he had a son called Sumati, and the lineage is described leading up to Vasu and Oghavan. And then there is the other son called Narishyanta. So we've seen Prsadhra, Kavi, Karusha, Dhrsta. Now the fifth is Nrga. Sixth is Narishyanta. And Narishyanta had a son called Chitrasena, and from him was born Daksha, and so on. His lineage is given, which led up to a person called Agniveshya. And interestingly, this Agniveshya also became a great sage called Kanina, and from him a whole class of Brahmins have come about called Agniveshyanas. So this is another example. This is the posterity of Narishyanta. Then the seventh son is Dishta, and he had a son called Nabhaga. There's another Nabhaga who comes later, but this is Nabhaga, who interestingly took to the profession of Vaishya, which is business class, agriculture, and so on. So it says Nabhago Dishtaputro Anyaha Karmana Vaishyatam Gataha. So he became a Vaishya. So now we see how interestingly, just in the sons of Manu, one son who his progeny became Brahmanas, one son remained rulers or kings, couple of sons became renounced avadhutas, and then one son became a Vaishya, which is a businessman. So all of this goes to show that birth is not determinant of one's varna. So this is the great folly that has crept into the society, that birth seems to be the determinant of one's so-called caste. This concept is not found in Bhagavatam or in Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says clearly in Bhagavad Gita, Chaturvarnyam maya srishtam guna karma vibhagacha. He says the four varnas, which are four classes of people, are according to their guna and karma, that is their qualities and their activities. So it has got nothing to do with birth, and that fact is illustrated in this story. So all of Bhagavatam is a commentary on Bhagavad Gita through both teachings and stories. And in different chapters, in different stories, different verses of Bhagavad Gita are explained. And here we see an explanation of that particular verse of Gita, which was already explained as a teaching by Narada. If you remember in the 7th Skandha, when Narada spoke of Dharma to Yudhishthira, he had a beautiful verse. He said, anyone who shows a symptom of a particular varna, whose qualities are of a particular varna, he ought to be considered to be of that varna regardless of his birth. He said, Yasya yal lakshanam proktam pumso varnabhi vyanjakam yad anyatrapi drishyeta tat tenaiva vinirdishet. So he says, whatever he is supposedly born to, but if he is showing symptoms, qualities, activities of a particular varna, that is the varna he is belonging to, not this varna of birth. So this is an important and very urgent need for society to learn, especially in Bharat, to not determine and be identified based on birth, but to recognize, because there are so many who are born in a particular community, but they take to business and entrepreneurship, which is the quality of Vaishya. And there are some who take to administration and army and so on, which is the quality of Kshatriya. And there are many, of course, who take to being wage earners, however sophisticated the job may be. If they take to the position of a wage earner in a company or in a corporation, then that is the job of a Shudra. So the various constitutional qualities of people is what determines their varna, and there is no varna which is higher or lower. There are people who are needed as wage earners, who are laborers, who work hard and make money and help society, who are the Shudras. There are people who are required to start businesses, who are the Vaishyas. There are people who are required for public service, for administration, for military purposes, and so on, who are the Kshatriyas. And there are people who are necessary for maintaining wisdom, for teaching, for imparting wisdom to others, and for showing the direction to other classes, that is Brahmanas. So these four classes are necessary in all society, and it is very clear that they are not by birth. And this is very beautifully illustrated in this story. Manu being born as a Kshatriya, his sons, one of them has become a Vaishya, a businessman in agriculture, one has become a Brahmana, sagely being, one completely renounced and went past all the four varnas, who is Kavi, and then one who took to his constitution by birth, which is to be a ruler as Kshatriya. So all of these are seen. So what this implies is there is flexibility, and therefore one has to know oneself. Swadharma is the meaning of this particular idea, that one has to know what is one's constitutional propensity and be true to that, and not force oneself to be something because of birth, and not discriminate based on birth, certainly. So we see thus Dishta, son, becoming a Vaishya, and his progeny is given, which results in especially one particular person called Marutta, who is supposed to be someone who is very expert in doing various yajnas. And continuing with his progeny, Marutta, and so on, it leads to someone called Trinabandhu, and he had a son called Vishala, who built the city called Vaishali, and so on. So their whole progeny and the line of kings born from Vishala in the city of Vaishali is all given. So this is the seventh son. Now the eighth son is Sharyati. Sharyati is the son of Vaivasvata Manu again, and he was a master of the highest truth. He knew the Vedas well. He was a master of sacrifices, especially yajnas and so on. And it is said, it's a very interesting story. So now we are entering the third chapter of 9th Skandha. So we finished the second chapter. The third chapter continues with the story of the sons of Manu. And this particular son, Sharyati, is a very interesting son, because rather his daughter, Sukanya, we see a very interesting story. We saw the story of how gender reassignment was done in the first chapter with the story of Sudyumna. Now we see a similarly interesting story here, where Sukanya, the daughter of Sharyati, she goes to the forest once along with her father, and they go to a place where there is a hermitage, but the hermitage doesn't have any sage there. It is actually the hermitage of the sage Chyavana. Chyavana is a famous sage again. He is the one who's the author of Chavanparash, because that particular Ayurvedic preparation comes from him and is very famous even today. And it is said that this Chyavana was there in an ant hill. He was doing meditation for so long that an ant hill grew around him, and therefore the hermitage looked empty. So Sukanya was moving around in this particular hermitage, and she suddenly spotted this ant hill, and she could see two bright fireflies coming out of the earth through the ant hill. These were actually the eyes of the great sage Chyavana, but she did not realize it. And being a playful girl, she took a thorn and she wanted to prick those fireflies with the thorn. But when she did that, it is said that blood started flowing, and so everybody got really perturbed, realized that a big mistake has happened. The sage is sitting there, and the troops who had come along with the king and the daughter Sukanya were also disturbed by this because they were not able to move around freely, and they realized that some mistake has happened. And then, when everybody was wondering if some mistake has happened here because it seems like some mystical block is coming about, they were not able to move around freely and so on. So then Sukanya admits to her father silently. She realizes that she has made a mistake, and that's why all the troops are also suffering. And her father is very perturbed. So she goes and honestly says, "Oh, father, I have made a mistake. I pierced with a thorn. It seems to be the eyes of the sage." So immediately the king rushes to the sage, and the sage is sitting there underneath the ant hill. And then the ant hill is removed, and the king speaks to the sage, and he begs for his pardon. The sage looks at Sukanya and he asks if Sukanya is married. The king understands the mind of the sage because Sukanya is not married. So he offers the daughter Sukanya in marriage to the sage Chyavana. So this also shows how all the rishis in those days took wives, and this is why all the so-called gotras all have rishis, because the rishis were married and they took wife as the duty to have progeny to continue with the lineage of rishis. So he married Sukanya, and then the king left Sukanya in the hermitage and went away. And Sukanya was a very well behaved girl. She was a very chaste and very sincere girl. So she started to serve Chyavana very nicely. So Chyavana was much older than her, the sage, and she was a very young girl, but she was very cultured. So this is a sign of great culture that she was. First of all, she admitted her mistake on her own volition, even though she playfully made a mistake. Second, when the king offered to make up for it by offering her, she also accepted it. Then, third, after having been married to him, which happened so fast, yet she did not protest. Far from it, she happily accepted her position. And then she served this old husband of hers with all her heart. So, seeing all this, the sage was very pleased. And so now the sage invoked the two Ashwini Kumaras. The two Ashwini Kumaras are called as the celestial physicians. So he invoked the two Ashwini Kumaras, and then the sage tells them, "You both, you are the celestial physicians, so you bestow youth on me so that I can have my age and my exterior be as a young man suitable for this woman." So, because his heart was won over by Sukanya, he wanted to be also fair to her and not be an old man as a husband, but be of the appropriate age. So, he spoke to the Ashwini Kumaras and asked them to give him youth. So, the Ashwini Kumaras said they mystically created a pool of water there, and they said, they they said, "Why don't you enter this pool of water and then you can get youth back?" So when he was told so, Chavana entered the pool, but he was old, so he couldn't enter on his own. So the two Ashwini Kumaras also entered with him. And then when all three came out of the water, it is said that all three looked so beautiful, but they also looked alike. All three of them looked alike as the most captivating, handsome males, wearing beautiful earrings and flowers and having a very strong appearance and so on. But when they came out, the virtuous wife that Sukanya was, she didn't know what has happened there because she knew her husband entered the water with them. But now she doesn't know who the husband is among the three. So she said, "I cannot now accept any of you because I don't know who my actual husband is." So, hearing these words and praising her for not hurrying to choose someone but being very chaste in this way, The Ashwini Kumaras were pleased. They took their original form and they revealed the sage who remained in the beautiful young male form, and they blessed both of them and they left. So, this is a very interesting story again. Just as Sudyumna was born a woman and became a man, here we see someone who was very old who becomes young. So, all these various things that now people are interested in, whether it is gender reassignment or whether it is regaining youth through medical procedures, taking pills to remove various signs of old age, all of these, nothing is new. As they say, there is nothing new under the sun. We see Bhagavatam speaking of all these things thousands of years ago, and interestingly here we see the story of someone becoming young, regaining his youth through a medical potion. So now, interestingly, the king Sharyati comes, the father of Sukanya, he comes to visit the hermitage. And when he comes to visit, he is shocked because he sees his daughter with a very handsome looking man. And we see the culture of the king as well. The king, far from being happy for her daughter or something like that, because his daughter is now having a young husband, he was actually very disturbed because he thought she was not loyal to the old sage and she took someone else as her husband. So he chastised her. He said, even if the sage was old, you ought not to do this. You have betrayed him. And if you have deserted him because of his old age and you have taken someone else now instead of him, that is not a very good thing at all. It is a stain on the whole family. And because of this, the whole family is affected by your behavior. So the king does not know what has happened, and therefore he chastises his daughter, but in the process he reveals the culture of the king too, that he would rather have his daughter serve the old husband, which is the right thing to do, rather than simply go to a younger man for material or sensual pleasure. So we see all these things today, how many times parents are not giving the higher order principle to children of service and of taking care of the elders and of accepting a situation, but supporting them in going by their whims and fancies, all of which only take people in random directions. So the king Sharyati shows here true culture by saying you ought to serve the husband you are married to as long as he is being nice to you. And since he is a great sage, even if he is old, you ought to serve him. But of course, the daughter was innocent, and so she smiled and said, "Dear father, it is none other than your son in law, the delightful son or the progeny of the sage Bhrigu, and you have simply been deceived because he has gone through this mystical process." She says, Evam Bhruvanam Pitaram Smayamana Shuchismita Uvacha Tata Jamata Tava Esha Bhrigunandanaha. Jamata means son in law. She says, "This is your Jamata, your son in law only, nobody else, no one else has come here. He has simply become young." And listening to this story, the father was, of course, supremely pleased, and he got to know the whole story now from both of them, and he was astonished and gratified, and he hugged his daughter. And Chyavana also returned the favor to the Ashwini Kumaras as well, who gave him youth. It is said that by giving them soma juice, which is an elixir that they are normally not entitled to, but Chyavana, by his powers, was able to give them the soma juice. Then Shuka Brahmam continues after giving this very interesting story of Sharyati's daughter Sukanya. He says Sharyati also had 3 sons, and out of them one son Aanarta, he had a son again called Revata, and they built a city called Kushasthali, which is Dwaraka. So Aanarta is the name for modern Gujarat, and as a capital he built a city in the ocean, which is Kushasthali or Dwaraka. And it is said that he had many sons. And here again another interesting story comes, which again reveals the whole concept of in physics of how gravity changes time. It's very interesting that all these things are in Bhagavatam. So it is said that they had a son, and this son had a daughter called Revati, and he wanted Revati to marry the most suitable husband. So, because of his mystical powers, it is said he went to a higher planet, he went to the Brahma Loka, and in Brahma Loka he met with Brahma, it is said, and said, I want to find a suitable daughter for a suitable husband for my daughter. But Brahma laughed and said, you made a big mistake, because by you coming here and going back to earth, 27 cycles of yugas have passed. So the idea here is, when you go to a different realm, so now physics talks about this, where if you go to a realm where gravity is very high, then spending one day there is equivalent to spending 100 years on earth, and so on. So similar concept is given here, that going to Brahma Loka and spending even a few minutes there and coming back results in multiple centuries of time going away in earth. And therefore Brahma says, by you coming here and going back, so clearly the king has some mystical process by which he is able to do such space travel. But Brahma says, because of the space travel you have done, when you go back to earth, all that you know would have been swept off by time. 27 cycles of yugas would have gone. You would go to the 28th cycle. So that is why the 28th cycle is where he goes back to. And he also says in the 28th cycle, very interestingly, Lord is appearing. So this is the appearance of Krishna. So he goes directly to the time this king, whose daughter is Revati, he goes directly to the time when Krishna appears in the same Dwaraka where he came from. So this king is told by Brahma that when you go back, 27 cycles of yugas would have completed, 28th would be going on, and in that Dwapara Yuga will be going on. And therefore when you go back, there will be the descent of the Supreme Being Krishna with his manifestation, with his expansion Balaram. And as we saw earlier too, when the avatars were given, Krishna comes with his expansion, who is Adisesha, who is Balaram. And therefore he says Balaram will be the suitable match for your daughter Revati. And therefore when you go back, you will be in the 28th cycle of yugas in the same Manvantara. So each Manvantara, as we know, has 71 cycles of yugas. So again, the quick measure of time is, there are 1,000 cycles of yugas in one kalpa, and the 1,000 cycles have 14 manvantaras, that is 14 manus. So each manvantara has 71 cycles of yugas. So this particular Manu, Vaivasvata Manu, he is presiding over 71 cycles, and 27 cycles have gone because of this time travel by this king. And therefore when he goes back, he goes to the 28th Manvantara, where Revati is married to Balaram. So it is said that he gave Revati to Balaram, and then he retired to Badrikashram to the divine sages Naranarayana. So with this chapter ends. So of course he is just touching here the fact that Revati is married to Balaram, which will come much later in the 10th skandha, but it's just one interesting aspect of travel that results in difference in time dilation. And this concept is beautifully given in Bhagavatam through the story, by which this particular king has lost so many centuries due to his travel to a different realm in space, and therefore he comes back to give his daughter to Balaram, who comes much later. So with this chapter ends, and we have seen the account of 8 of the sons of Manu, Vaivasvata Manu. We have only 2 more sons left, and we will see, one is Nabhaga and the other is Ikshwaku. We will see their stories going forward. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.